Joan Velasco, Esquire, attorney for Windhorse Legal, PLLC, is with us today. And Joe is going to talk to us about COVID-19 and the legal issues stemming from this pandemic for our horse community. I will be hosting Joe in this endeavor. So if you have questions during our chat here today, please, if you're on Zoom, use the Q&A box. And if you are with us from Facebook Live, use your comments. And we will get started answering questions as well as we go through our lunch chat today. If you don't get your question answered during the lunch chat, we will also have some time at the very end to answer questions. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Joe, and we'll start our conversation here with you and I. And just as a brief bio for our presenter, attorney Joe Velasco resides in northwestern Nebraska. She has been a member of Massachusetts Bar since 1993, and her experience includes litigation work for the Boston Police Department. Today, Joe focuses primarily on equine law through Windhorse Legal, PLLC, a web-based law firm. And I'll be sharing some links to this site in the chat. She is also a lifelong horsewoman and horse professional with experiences in barn management, riding instruction, training, equine rehabilitation, and as a clinician. Joe is the co-president of the nonprofit Tapestry Institute, which helps people reconnect with nature, and she currently runs their horse-human relationship program. So thank you very much, Joe, for being here. I was really excited to meet you over the internet. And just to kind of fill in some of the holes in your bio, could you just give us the cliff notes of your journey as both a horsewoman and a lawyer?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. And I want to do a disclaimer I always have to do that I cannot give legal advice to anyone, so what I'm doing today is all education. If you are in your jurisdiction, have a question, you need to talk to an attorney in your jurisdiction. But let me back up and say I've been involved with horses since I was 6 years old, and I'm 52 this year. And I grew up in upstate New York, so I had a horse that I boarded. I actually was involved in an equine law case when I was in high school. My horse was in an accident and had to be put down, and we sued the person whose horses had gotten on our property. We did not win the case. It was quite devastating, but that was kind of my first introduction to equine law, and this was back in 1984. So I went ahead and went to law school, went to college at Boston College and majored in psychology. Went to law school, wanted to be an assistant DA, but they weren't hiring when I graduated. So I went ahead and stayed with the Boston Police where I'd interned and had a fabulous time there, really helping the department. I actually prosecuted police officers in internal hearings, but also represented them in depositions. So it was a really interesting job there. I then went on and became a legal editor, but by that point I had gotten back into horses. And I actually trained with Adrian Iorio, who's an advanced level eventer in Massachusetts, for about 5 years. Then my life took a big change when I went to my nonprofit. And as you stated, what we do is we reconnect people to nature from within Indigenous worldview. It was founded by a Choctaw scientist. And I've been able to take my love and passion for horses and really explore, do research and education about that horse-human relationship. When I decided to open my own firm, I knew I wanted to be virtual because it's an easier way for people to work with attorneys. And equine law was simply a natural fit. For a while, I did not practice law, but I did experience being a clinician for fearful riders, managing a barn, being a live-in trainer, teaching everyone from 6-year-olds to 72-year-olds, running my own horse business, running a horse nonprofit, a nonprofit that has a horse program. So I bring a unique perspective because while I'm an attorney, I also am a horse professional and a horse personal person. So all these things can play into my experience when I work with clients. When they have a question, for one, I'm not going to look at them like, what are you talking about? But two, I've probably been in a similar, if not the exact same situation. So I really am happy that I can meld these two passions together and bring them to people and help them in situations like COVID-19. My feeling is the law is a tool and we should use it to make our lives better. And this is one of those times where we can really use it. So that's kind of how I brought all of this together. My goal is really to help people. I think that's what the law should be for. We shouldn't be afraid of it. We should use it.
It's really amazing when our passions kind of align, our professional with what we would love to be doing anyway. So
Yes.
congratulations on that. I was very intrigued when I found your book, and this is a free ebook. I will give everybody the link on our Facebook page. But it's titled COVID-19 Legal Issues for the Horse Community. So, Jill, what prompted you to write this book?
Well, as a horse person, I'm on a lot of Facebook groups, for my own personal education and just mingling with people and relating with them. And I started to see a lot of people saying, what are we going to do? A lot of barn owners. How do we make it through this? What do I do with my borders? Should I be open? Shouldn't I be open? Am I going to be liable if I'm open? And there's not a lot of information out there to begin with, but what information there is can be really hard to understand. The one thing I tell people about the law is it turns on details. So if you are not a lawyer and you look something up, you may say, oh, look, see, we're okay. But that may be a very specific instance. And I thought, here is something I can offer to the community. When I did clinics, I worked with fearful horse riders. And this is a really scary time for everybody. We're all scared. We don't know where we're going with any of this. And nobody wants their horse business to close because of this. So I thought there's some really specific issues here. People are saying, what happens if I die, who's going to take my horse? I had someone call and I talked to them and she said, yeah, a friend of mine's a nurse in New Jersey. She said, if I die, will you take care of my horse? So all of these things, what everybody is dealing with COVID-19 is there. And then as horse people, we have on top of this, oh my gosh, our horses. If we're a barn owner, how are we going to keep our barn going? What's our liability? What's the best thing to do morally with this? There's so much on top of it. And if I can help people cut through that, then I think that's a good thing. I like to help people. And if we can lower our anxiety, that's a good thing. And our horses pick up on our anxiety too. So, my feeling was this is something that people really need to hear. What are the issues here? Instead of going to Google and either getting scared or getting information that's not accurate, because that doesn't help anybody. So I figured I can put some things together, put them out there. And then if someone is in, for example, California and they have an issue, they can call an attorney and say, oh, hey, I just read this thing about negligence. So they have the terms, because if you don't know the terms, you don't even know what to ask if you're talking to an equine attorney in your state. So if I can put that education out there, then someone can call an attorney and say, hey, what's constructive knowledge? What am I breaching my duty? And they can have a really good conversation. I've learned that when we're talking to each other, sometimes we're at cross purposes because we're not even on the same level. And if we can come and talk that way, then we can get the answers we need.
Yeah, that's great. I know that in my job, I've been to quite a few meetings since mid-March, and I've worked with quite a few horse owners and horse professionals. And there is a big question on the liability issues associated with operating a facility where you have boarders or trainers coming in, or the veterinarian professionals, farriers, as well. So from a liability standpoint, when we're looking at specifically equine facilities, what are some of the big issues that you've seen arise?
So really the theory we're going under for liability here is negligence. And we can kind of compare this to several other situations that have arisen. For example, in California, there was a child that was not vaccinated for measles, went to Disneyland, and then other children got sick. Or back when with AIDS and HIV, and those HIV actually has some very specific criminal statutes that have been put into place. But these are situations where someone is sick or could be sick, and other people could get the illness from them. So what is that level of liability? So really, we're going under negligence, and we are starting to see. When I wrote this book, there was maybe one or two cases out there. We're now seeing this starting to pop up. We're seeing people filing cases against Walmart, for example. There's a lot in the news about companies that are opening now. Should they be exempt from liability if somebody gets sick? So this is really starting to come into the thick of it. And when we talk about negligence, we've got to consider several different things. If there's an illness, notice is something that we consider. And in my book, I state we've already taken care of notice. Everybody knows this is around. We've been told you can be asymptomatic. So that one I think has really been taken care of. But one of the first things we look at is duty. And what is your duty to the person? If you have a boarding facility, you obviously are going to have a safe boarding facility. So you're not going to leave, pitchforks around where someone's going to walk into it and hurt themselves. And so if the case is being made that there's negligence, one is, what is your duty to the person? Right now, do you have a duty, for example, to wipe down all the surfaces with Lysol, to make sure that everybody's washing their hands? Do you have hand sanitizer? Do you have soap? What is your duty to the person visiting? And that can change. A boarder is paying you. So there may be a different level with a boarder than someone who's visiting your barn. The second thing, if there is a duty, then is there a breach of that duty? So should you have had the hand sanitizer out and you didn't have it? That if that's a duty, then you've breached it by not putting out the hand sanitizer. The biggest thing is, does the breach cause the injury? Is there a causal connection? And this, I think, when lawsuits are being filed, is going to be the hardest thing. So if someone is at home and they're not going anywhere, and I mean nowhere, they're at home, they're washing their hands, they have food for a month, they simply drive to your barn, don't get gas, drive home, and then they get sick. That's going to be a stronger argument that your duty, if you breached it, caused the illness because there's no other way they could have gotten it. That's going to be hard to prove right now because people do stop at the gas station. And when you stop at the gas station, are you using a wipe on the handle? Are you using a wipe on the code, the card reader? Are you using a wipe on your card? Do you have a mask? This is a virus that can be on surfaces, and that we're learning really every day new things to combat it. So for example, when I wrote this, the CDC wasn't saying to wear a mask. Now people are wearing masks. So that's the real complication, I think. And that's going to be a really interesting thing to see how that plays out. If there is that causal connection, then you go to damages. So, that can be fairly easy to prove. Were you in the hospital? Did you lose wages from work? Things like that. One of the big issues here is what's called constructive knowledge, and that's clearly a legal term. And when we talk about constructive knowledge, what we're saying is, should you have known? So the example I give is, you have a trainer you've sent to Italy. We know Italy is a hot spot. Sent to Italy, for example, to look at a horse to buy. And the trainer comes back, and you don't have the trainer quarantined, and then somebody gets sick at your barn. The argument could be made that you had constructive knowledge that your trainer was in this big hot spot, and you didn't do anything to keep them away from your borders, or to keep them away from the surfaces, or even the horses. Because, here's one of the things they're saying now is, can the virus be carried on a coat of a horse or a dog? Or there's so much here. And so these are all topics that we need to at least be cognizant of. And what I tell people is, they want to say, I don't want to be sued. And I understand that nobody wants to be sued. But what we have to realize is anybody can file a lawsuit. What we're looking at is, how do you defend against that lawsuit? And, I start off the book by saying, first, we need to figure out morally what we want to do. So, if you don't feel comfortable opening your barn, don't open your barn. You don't even get to the legal arguments. But if you're worried about the legal arguments, you've got to look at all these little pieces. And those are going to be the pieces an attorney considers when they look to see if they want to take your case and see what your chances are, whether you're suing or you're being sued. So I really want everybody to know anybody can be sued. Anyone can bring a suit. It's a matter of, will it be successful? And these are really hard times. I've heard from clients who have said, hey, I had boarders and they got mad that they couldn't go be with the horses. I told them they couldn't. They reported me to the state. The state came out. Everything's fine. I kicked the boarders out. I mean, all this it's just so contentious. And we all want to be with our horses. We really, really do. But, we also have to weigh what are the cons of being with our horses. And it's such a difficult time that if people can work together, I think it's best. But if we can't, these are the things you need to consider, or you need to talk to an attorney about and say, can you explain constructive knowledge to me a little more? Or does this fit under that? Or, so I really wanted people to see this is where these lawsuits are going to be coming from. If you've got Walmart knew about it, they let the people keep working, the people got sick, they didn't clean facility appropriately. These are all things we can translate over to barns. Or to clinics, or, when we get into things like the vet and the farrier, then we get into the essential workers. And I, that's a whole other area. So first we have the negligence, and what is a court going to look at for negligence? And that, I think, is the big issue that's changing all the time. But if we know the basics, then we can move on from there.
Valerie has a question. Is this the same principle as malpractice, dereliction to duty, directly resulting in damage, and who will be establishing the standard of care?
No, when we talk about malpractice, that's a little different, and that's negligence is a general legal principle. So of course, state law controls. When we're talking about malpractice, we're really talking about, for example, a doctor. That's a different duty of care. We're looking at for example, vet malpractice. Should the vet have known that this was going to cause a problem? Did they act appropriately? So it is very similar, but there are different duties of care there.
And then as far as who's establishing a standard of care, is that ongoing?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is this is changing. So when we say, well, you have a duty, or you've breached that duty, what is that? 2 months ago, nobody was wearing masks. Now you need to wear a mask. Some states say you have to wear masks. So again, you've got to throw all that in. If your state is saying you have to wear a mask, and you say, no, you can come to the barn, you don't have to wear a mask, there's a duty that's been imposed upon you from the state that you are not actually adhering to. So that's why I say there are so many particular details hard.
We have one more follow-up question. If we're following local guidelines in regards to gatherings, would that be considered a factor in a liability issue?
Yes. Now, I can't speak obviously to the state law or to the actual ordinance, but, for example, let's say you have a barn and you can't people have to wear masks there, or you can only have 10 people. If somebody sues you, that I would use that as a defense, saying we were following the guidelines. We had to do this. This was imposed upon us, because of course you need to do that. Now, if it's just a guideline and not a law, again, I would argue you still needed to do that. It's not as strong as, for example, in places like New York, where you have to wear a mask or you get a fine. I mean, that's much stronger, obviously, than simply a suggestion of wearing a mask. So that's why I say these things turn on the little details, as to what happens. one little detail can make or break a case.
Yeah, so it's such a big, complex, and very new outlook on things for sure. Just something else to add to the mix, right? When it comes to equine and liability.
Yes.
In your ebook, you specifically mentioned virtual training and riding instruction. Do horse industry professionals need to amend their liability waivers if they are working with their clients virtually?
I am suggesting they do that because if you're training that way, you're not in person, and so you don't know exactly what's going on. So, for example, the horse could be lame and you might not even know it. You're not there to be able to give the same feedback. Now, if you're doing, for example, a live lesson, which you can do, that's obviously similar to what you would do in person. But if someone is simply sending you a video and you're sending a comment, or you're coaching in a non-real time situation, then my suggestion is to at least add a few phrases in there, stating, you haven't been able to see the horse, the person is saying the horse is not lame, is in good condition, and maybe even something acknowledging that there may be a miscommunication, because especially like if you're doing email, how many times have we gotten an email where we're talking to someone and the next thing we know, we were talking at cross purposes. So my feeling is if we're doing it virtually, we want to go ahead and cover bases and say, we're obviously doing it this way because of the pandemic. So here are some more guidelines, here's some more areas that I want to cover and say, there may be miscommunications. You acknowledge your horse, is healthy. You're riding in a safe area under safe conditions, really, really add those things in there just so that you're covered, because we don't know what's going on unless it's actually live. And even then, you don't know what's going on around the arena or anything. It's really a different situation. So my suggestion is to at least put in something to that effect.
Well, I think that's good advice. I hadn't even thought of it, and the first time that I actually thought of it was last week during a webinar put on by Path International, and they were discussing virtual therapy and liability from that standpoint. Pretty much the same exact advice on that. So I appreciate that. But yeah, before now, that just really wasn't in my wheelhouse.
It's kind of similar to when you get an aerobics DVD and it has the long legal thing at the very beginning, consult a doctor, that's because the person can't see you or anything. So think of it that way. You've got, you want to think it's just like the DVD where we're not in person. So I'm going to have a long thing, to just take care of everything.
Jackie has a question. I'm just going to read it out here. If we find out that someone who came to our barn recently is now tested and or diagnosed with COVID-19, or has a family member that is being tested, diagnosed, is it part of the barn owner's due diligence to quarantine the entire barn, or is the burden of quarantine simply on the person family being tested?
I actually recommend people call. Most states have a number you can call and talk to someone, whether it's in Department of Ag or the health district, because a lot of places have guidelines as to what they're doing. And those guidelines should be followed first before we worry about whether there's liability or what we should do. If it was my barn, I would probably want to quarantine. One of the things they're doing is contact tracing. So if you can call whoever it is, Department of Ag, health district, and say, somebody at my barn has gotten it, first of all, that will help them, but they can actually give you the guidance of what they are asking people to do in their community. And that's probably the best way to do that. And if you're doing that, it goes to your duty of care. You're saying, hey, I'm taking care of this by following the appropriate channels to see what they're doing. Because, we are seeing different hotspots, different areas, even within a state, are handling this differently. So if we can keep with the guidelines of what's going on in our area, then we can make sure that we're all on the same page with what's going on. So, I know Massachusetts is heavily populated and you can have barns several miles apart. if you can call someone local and say, hey, we have someone who's tested positive, then all the barns in the area will hopefully be doing the same thing.
I have another question, and this is from Amber. What would happen if you're following your state guidelines, but those guidelines are less strict than the federal CDC guidelines?
That's a really good question. What an attorney would probably do if you got sued is say, here were the federal guidelines and these were stronger and should have been followed. And, one of the things that you try and show in a case like this is, what is the duty? What were other people doing? Are all the barns around you following federal CDC? Is everyone else following federal and your local is relaxed? Then, go with the federal, go with the stronger. If you're going with stronger protections, that's going to give you a stronger defense. And, I know there's the weighing of, but what if I can't get my workers here and I can't run the barn? But we have to think on the other side, if you're sued, if you're found liable, you could lose the barn because you weren't doing what you should have done. So, again, it's a changing situation. We've got to stay on top of what the CDC is saying, but the stronger your protections are, then the stronger argument you have that you were actually taking care of people at your barn. You were doing everything you could. If you know there's stronger guidelines and they're working, then taking those give you a stronger defense.
Very good, very good. One question that we've had from a barn owner was what to do with a horse owner that couldn't pay their board bill right now. And I know that, at least in Michigan, we're seeing very high unemployment issues associated with COVID-19. It's not a given that you're going to get something back from the government, depending on, where you were when all of this started. So what advice do you have to people in this profession that are caring for other people's horses and the money just isn't there right now?
Yeah, and I think that may be a bigger problem as this goes on longer and longer. And I had two things. One is I try to tell people, because I see them saying this online, to do what they can to set something up to take care of their horse. For example, with estate planning, we have what's called a horse trust or an animal trust. And there's some form of it in every state. You can actually put aside money. You can name a person to take care of your horse so that if something happens to you, that horse can get taken care of. And that, I think, is a really important thing, because I've seen it on Facebook, even with dogs. This dog's owner died, or this person dropped their dog off at the shelter because they can't pay for it. So that's one thing that we personally can do to take care of our horse. Now, if somebody has lost their job and they can't pay the board, this is when I try and encourage horse people. We can come together in amazing ways. And I've seen it happen. I was in Colorado when we had 500-year floods and there were hay banks and people were donating hay. It was fantastic. And what I try and tell barn owners is, if you can come together, have a virtual meeting and say, look, we're a family here. Can we put money in a slush fund if somebody that can't afford hay? Is there a hay producer that we can work with? Let's get creative. We can be incredibly creative people. How can we do this? Because we all love horses and nobody wants to lose their horse. And a barn owner doesn't want to put a lien on a horse and have to sell the horse at auction. And, that gets so complicated and it gets so contentious. So, let's be creative. Some people have said, well, I have a contract and I can't enforce the contract now. They don't have the money. Well, then sit down and talk. What can we do? How can we work this out so we can all get through this together? We're all in this together. We are all being affected and we're all scared. And when people are scared, they get angry, but let's put all that aside. Nobody wants to lose their horse. Nobody wants to lose their business, and nobody wants to see a horse starve. So let's get creative and see what can we do. Let's take care of each other as horse people. Let's take care of our horses. We all love the horses. So that's kind of what I tell people, is to really be creative and think about what can we do. If worse comes to worse, obviously the barn owner may have to get a lien and sell the horse, but let's let that be the very last thing we do, because we will get through this. We just have to come together to do it.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate the note of encouragement. I know there's some great guidance on the American Horse Council site,
Yes.
and a lot of the state horse councils are taking a very proactive approach to what potentially could be some upcoming issues in horse care. So I appreciate that. Another aspect of this, and that came up here recently, we had an extremely successful Michigan Horse Expo this year, and a few days after that expo was when the whole "stay home, stay safe" occurred in our state. So they just barely made that event under the wire, you know. But you know, that's a huge event. Multi clinicians and people that are have brought their booths there from all over the country, some outside of the country. How should events plan and organize and design contracts in this age of a pandemic, where maybe we are able to open up business as normal, but if we get a second or third wave of this, we may have to close down for another length of time? How do we organize our contracts from that standpoint? And I'm just gonna open the door for my dog because she's pawing right now. So.
Okay. Do you want me to go ahead and answer now? What we really should do, I'll wait till she comes back so that she can hear this answer. I wanted to wait for you so you could hear the answer.
So choice of working from home.
Oh, I know. My dog was barking earlier too. So what we should do, and we actually have seen USEF is doing this. So they said they're going to start opening some stuff up. But one of the interesting statements in their release about it was people are going to be signing new waivers and indemnity agreements. So first of all, obviously, we've got to follow what state protocol is, what local protocol is, CDC, all of that. But I think we also need to put in our contracts the acknowledgement that, you know, the person, for example, will follow what they're told to do on the grounds. Because, you know, it's difficult. It's difficult wearing a mask and doing horse stuff. But if that's what the showgrounds require, then the person coming there has to agree to that. You know, USEF, for example, there's been some questions. If there's a minor, can other people come? And they said, well, one parent can come. So we can make contracts that say, you know, if your child is showing, you will bring one person to, you know, the adult will come, whether it's a parent or someone else who has custody of the child. You know, you won't bring all these people from your barn that you normally bring. You'll wipe things down, you know, basically having them acknowledge that they're going to do what the rules are at the facility. You know, if you think of it as, we always have rules when we have a show, and we always have rules at the barn. Just add these rules in. You know, we don't know how long this is going to be. When people talk about a new normal, this is part of it. So what are the things that are required? I know one of the USEF ones said they might have people moving their own jumps or bringing their own jumps, or, you know, these are really big changes. But having those contracts, you know, you will bring your own jump, you will wear a mask, you know, when required. And I always like to be as specific as possible, because if you just say when required, somebody could say, well, I didn't know it was required then. So, you know, you'll wear, you know, you don't need to wear the mask when you're doing your jumping course, for example, if that is what is eventually put out. But you will wear the mask when you're cleaning the stall or when you're walking around the showgrounds. Put all these things in because, one, the person's agreeing to it, and two, they know about it. So people think contracts are there so you go to court. They're not. They're there so that people have a meeting of the minds. And I am of the belief that a contract, it's an agreement between people. It doesn't have to go to this horrible place. So, you know, put in there, for example, maybe you have a warning once if you don't wear the mask, or if you have a health concern, come talk to us, or, you know, make it so that this works for everybody. But these are things we need to put in, just like we would put in, you know, don't leave the horses in the pasture overnight if that's a barn rule, or just think of these as, these are now barn rules and they're now show rules, and keep the contract up to date because it may be changing. Masks weren't required a few months ago, now they are. What if they change the kind of mask required? Who has to provide the mask? If it's a multi-day event, how often should the mask be changed? I mean, these are all things that people need to think about. And these are the things that attorneys think about. We think of every scenario when it comes to these things. Because I said, one little detail makes a difference.
Well, and that leads to a good point. You had mentioned earlier about preparing for if you yourself can't care for your horse, setting up a trust and everything. Is there anything else you have to say about planning for the care of your horse during this kind of uncertain time, authorizations, anything along those standpoints?
Yeah, one of the things that some people don't think of having is, say you can't go to your barn. And of course, people have asked me what's essential and not essential. Of course, as horse people, we all think it's essential to go be with our horses. I totally get that. But we have to realize, one, if you're injured and you have to go to a hospital room, you're going to take care away from COVID-19 patients. So that's one thing. There have been countries that have banned riding until this is over. The other thing is, if you can't get to the barn because your horse is colicking, who has authorization to say that your horse can be taken care of? Let's say you're sick or somebody can't get a hold of you. So I suggest, generally speaking, in a boarding contract that there's an authorization in there for the barn owner. And because I know there are times the barn owner isn't around, one or two people beyond that. The other thing to have in place with your vet is they may have it, or you can have an equine attorney draft one, basically a release saying, yes, this person has the authorization to go ahead and say my horse can be treated, and here is the price limit I have, or here's what I don't want done. So some people don't want colic surgery for their horse for whatever reason. Or some people say, you know what, I only have $1,000 to spend. This is going to be a $5,000 surgery. I can't afford it. And those are hard decisions. Nobody likes to make them. But the reality of horses is it can get very expensive. So if people have these forms, again, then this stuff is taken care of if they're incapacitated because they're sick, or if they're caring for a family member, if for some reason they can't get there. And, these are things where COVID-19 can hit really quickly with people, or they do need to go take care of a relative or something. So having the boarding contract have it, and also talking to your vet and saying, what do you have, or do I need to draft something for you to have? Then everybody's on the same page. We all want to be on the same page, so that later there isn't a misunderstanding of, oh, I did want the colic surgery, or, yeah, there's no limit, just whatever it takes to save my horse. And also writing down things like the supplements and, when you want the blank, or getting out of blanket season. But all these things that you might normally go do, just have it all written out. The more it's written out, the more we understand what we want. And if we have those release forms, then the barn owner is taken care of and the vet is taken care of as well.
Sounds like even without the pandemic, these are probably understandings that we should all have about our horse from the get-go. So I appreciate that, and I know it's hard to get organized.
Yes, we all just want to go ride. We don't want to worry about all the paperwork.
Right. Maybe this will give us some incentive to get it organized. Well, with that, we have a few minutes left for just questions. I do have a question from Linda. Linda says, I do therapeutic horseback riding. I have no problem with masks, gloves, etc., but we need people next to the rider as well as leading the horse. Can we add a waiver that states that we are following the standards, but we need to be closer than 6 feet to do the lesson?
I think the issue there is going to come down to that essential question. So, obviously an essential worker at a barn, and of course you got to look at your state guidelines, is someone who feeds the horse, waters the horse, cleans out the stall. When things are being relaxed, this, for example, would be a question. We have a group here that has come together to give guidelines, and the governor's giving guidelines. That is a question I would actually ask. Is the teaching of this, the therapy of this, is this an essential act? Is it even allowed? Now, if they say it's allowed, then I would put something in saying, your workers have masks, your workers have gloves, you're doing all of this so that you actually have in writing you are doing this, but the person that's involved understands there's still a risk. You know, we're not saying if you wear gloves you will, or if you wear a mask you will definitely not get it. We're lowering the risk. So I would put something in a liability form after first checking to make sure you can do that program. And that those are wonderful programs. So I know we really want everybody to get back to doing those. But first make sure that the state is actually okay with you doing that. I know there are some states that when people have opened, they have enforced this and sent people to jail or given them citations. So first check with your state. And they may have guidelines too. You know, if you're doing actual therapy, they may consider that, for example, essential work in some sort of medical way. So check with your state first to get guidance from them, because getting guidance from them, again, then if there's a problem legally, you went and got guidance and that's what you were told to do. So that also can help you there. But that's great that you're good with the masks and the gloves and everything, because that's going to go, you know, we're being told that goes a long way. But I would get guidance from the state first.
I know too, Path International just released this week their webinar that they had, I believe, last week on opening up programs. And they also have some really good articles to go along with that information. So Linda, or anybody involved with horse therapy, I would definitely suggest that you review those as well, but also work with your state. Make sure you're following your state guidelines. So any other questions? I'm looking through here and I don't see any other questions. I think your discussion was extremely thorough and I appreciate that. I'm going to put a link to Joe's ebook on our My Horse University website. That also gives you contact information if you have any follow-up that you'd like to do with Joe. Joe, do you have any last words for our audience here?
I think just come together with everybody. Let's try and work things together. People tend to think of the law as combative, and actually the law can be a healing tool. It can really bring us together. So let's all work together to get through this, because we will. We really will. It may be a long time, we don't know, but we will get together. So let's show what we can do as a horse community, and let's come together and help each other and help our horses. That's what we're all about.
Well, I appreciate your positive message during this time. We all need a little dose of that right now, I think. And with the nice weather coming back, hopefully we'll all be back out and enjoying our horses. Maybe not quite the same or how we thought we would this summer, but just being around horses in general has got to be soothing for the soul right now. So.
Definitely.
Really appreciate your work on this and writing your ebook and being so generous with it to our horse community. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on, and hopefully people will find value in it, and it'll give them a little bit of peace of mind during a difficult time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, everybody have a great day. Next week, we'll actually have another lunch chat with Susie White. And we will be talking about selecting the youth horse. So there should be a lot of fun discussion with that topic as well. All right. Take care, everybody. If you have any more questions, just put them in our Facebook Live or our Facebook site under this webinar, and I will shoot those to Joe as well. All right, take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Joe. Thanks so much. Really great
Thank you.
job. Enjoyed
Bye-bye.
it. Bye.